Welcome to the Simply Financial podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Calandra. So today's episode is the first of a three-part series that I'm doing in conjunction with Nationwide Retirement Institute. Regular listeners, you'll notice that this is the second three-part series with Nationwide. The first one covered tax-efficient retirements. We talked about Roth IRAs in the second episode and health savings accounts in the third. This series, and this is the first episode in this three-part series, is going to talk about Social Security, and then we're going to talk about women in retirement in the next episode in the series, and then finish up with planning for healthcare. So this episode, again, the first one in the series, is going to be focused on Social Security. I have as my guest my brother. He's a returning guest and a special guest because it is my brother, and he has been with the Retirement Institute for almost 8 years and has participated in their thought leadership all along the way, and in fact helped me put together these series. So Steve, I'm glad you could join me today.
Thanks for having me back. That's a very good sign.
Wasn't that a nice intro?
You know what? I feel a little taller.
So we're going to talk about Social Security, and first maybe you could just give a quick overview. I believe we did this in the first episode we did together, but maybe some folks might have missed that. Just give a quick overview of the Retirement Institute.
The Nationwide Retirement Institute was created to break down and simplify some of the macro issues that retirees face. So Nationwide has a mission, which is to protect the people, businesses, and futures of everyone we work with extraordinary care. So through the Nationwide Retirement Institute, we look at things like planning for healthcare and retirement, long-term care, health savings accounts, tax-efficient retirement income, women and retirement, because they have different concerns than when they're actually in a couple, should they choose to get married. And then what we do is we break these down, we simplify them, and we bring them to market in education and insights. But more to the point is we always try to create a tool or a free report to help the audiences understand the topic from their perspective. And then lastly, we always offer ongoing consultative support. So we work through financial professionals like you, and at any point in time that your clients or your target audience has a question with respect to any of these items, they can get with you in a conference call and leverage the resources of our research to make sure that they get all of their questions answered.
Beautiful. And in my experience, the Retirement Institute is a great platform for thought leadership and provides some valuable education material for advisors and their clients. I think it's really a very innovative part of Nationwide. So we're going to talk about Social Security, and candidly, in preparing for this interview, it's a massive topic. I mean, I think, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of Social Security choices, and there's a lot of minutia that we could get into, different scenarios based on age, who passed away, when they made money, how long they made it for, marital status. There's a lot. So we're going to try and do this episode, Steve, and kind of stick into the mainstream middle of what we're going to see most commonly, because I think you would agree it's an awfully big topic, but I wanted to cover it because it's one of the most important aspects of a retirement income plan.
One of the most important aspects of a retirement income plan, and that is whether or not someone desperately needs the income to make sure that they can help survive through retirement, or even folks that are your they've done a really good job. They have a higher than average asset base that's out there. They have enough income. We find across the board, this is an important topic to all of the clients that are out there. You know what? Almost primarily, if nothing else, throughout your whole life while we're working or your spouse is working, through tax mandate, we're forced to fund the trust. So we find almost everyone we come across is highly engaged in the idea of, how do I at least get my money back? How do I maybe optimize it? But most importantly, everyone wants to know, when's the right time for me to possibly take my Social Security?
Great. And that's a good place to jump off, because to begin with, let's talk a little bit about when most people take their Social Security? So correct me if I'm wrong. You could take Social Security as early as 62 and as late as 70.
Correct.
And you could take it any place in between. And there's early retirement, normal retirement age, and full retirement. Is that the terminology?
Full retirement age. You got it.
And so when do most people, what do the statistics tell us about when most people begin taking Social Security?
Of those that might wait till their full retirement age, we're somewhere around age 66 to age 67. We could talk more about that in a little bit. This is the concept of when the government expects you to take your Social Security income. It's called full retirement age. And what we see is about 3 out of 10 people in the population are currently waiting till their full retirement age. To your point, you can take benefits as early as age 62. And we're seeing actually 3 out of 10 people always taking their benefits as soon as possible. But here's what I think is most interesting. 6 out of 10 people are all electing to take their benefits before their full retirement age. So to answer your question specifically, 3 out of 10 people in America are taking their benefits right away at 62. 6 out of 10 are all taking it before their full retirement age, which is pretty telling.
Okay, so if we do the rough math, that means only about 10% wait beyond that 66, 67 age range and wait until 68, 69, or 70.
Yeah, just over 10%. Yeah.
Huh. Okay. And it seems to me, in my experience, that people do that for a lot of reasons, some valuable, I think, and well thought out, and some not. I think at the base level, people recognize what you said before, Steve. They've been forced to put money in the system all these years. Now they get to 62 and they're anxious to start getting money out. For a lot of people, the decision isn't that any more complicated than that. What do you think?
For a lot of people, the decision isn't any more complicated than that. They want to get what's theirs as soon as possible. And, you know, I've been doing this, like you said, up to 8 years. I've probably done this presentation, no exaggeration, over 1,000 times in front of the public. And one of the things that always amazes me is when I talk with these folks is they find this to be a very confusing topic. And so from a financial planning perspective, you and I know when we see 6 out of 10 people all making the same decision on a confusing topic, we know that there's a percentage that need to or have to make the decision they're making, and we fully respect that. But we also know that from a financial planning perspective, there's going to be a percentage of them that just may not have the right information or data. And they're doing exactly what you're suggesting is they're defaulting instead of making their decision on information and data, or heaven forbid, getting advice from a financial professional like yourself.
So from the perspective of the Retirement Institute, what do you all see as some of the biggest mistakes people make where they're selecting Social Security and maybe not making an optimal choice? Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah, sure. The first mistake we see with respect to Social Security, and this is trying to stay like midline to try to hit the greatest number of your listeners, would be a lot of people have this knee-jerk reaction. They want to take their benefits at age 62 or before their full retirement age, which is fine. But a lot of people aren't aware of this thing that's called the earnings test.
This is not something you want to be unaware of. So I think this is great. Can you cover that?
Yeah. It's one of my favorite topics, as a matter of fact. And the reason why is this. If you ever elect to take early retirement benefits before your full retirement age, Social Security is not going to allow you to make any more than $18,960 in any given year leading up to the year you turn your full retirement age before Social Security begins to withhold $1 of your benefit for every $2 you earn above that threshold of $18,960. So I find the best way, Chris, to get people to get their brain around this is to annualize the numbers.
Okay.
So for every $10,000 one earns above $18,960,
I'm with you.
Social Security would begin to withhold $5,000 of the Social Security benefit.
That's not very consumer friendly.
That's not consumer friendly. So the question becomes, are there really people out there that don't have the right information or data that elect to take early retirement benefits because they've been paying their taxes and they want to get what's theirs, but they're planning on continuing to work and they make too much money? Did you ever hear my P90X story?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, this is one of my favorites.
All right.
Okay. So several years back, I'm in Clifton, New Jersey, setting up for what would be a client seminar. A financial
Okay.
professional invites me out. I'm setting up early.
Okay.
A guy walks in. He's 61 years old. He's getting ready to turn 62. He comes in and he tells me he's Google smart, that he's planning on retiring and taking his income from Social Security right away at 62. And then he starts to brag to me about the fact that he just finished his third round of P90X. So it was a surreal conversation. But now,
Well, wait a sec. What's P90X? That's like an exercise regimen, right?
yeah, man. So if you're like me later on tonight and you're digging in your Haagen-Dazs, right, you might be flipping through the channels and there's this infomercial for this company that's called Beachbody,
Understood.
right?
Okay.
They have these workout regimens and they say that if you can just follow these workout regimens for like 30, 60, 90 days, you can be built like an Adonis.
All right. I'm caught up.
All right, you're caught up, right? So the thing of it is, these workout regimens are difficult at any age, let alone the slightly advanced age of someone in their early 60s. So he was very proud of this, right? And he was oozing over. So here's the thing. I say to him, well, listen, enjoy my presentation and come back to me and let me know if I answered any of the questions that you had. But let me ask you a question. What are you thinking of doing if you're going to retire at age 62? And he goes, oh, I got this all planned out. I'm going to collect my Social Security. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set myself up as a 1099 employee, a consultant, doing exactly what I always did my whole career. I fully expect I should be able to make somewhere between $75,000 to $125,000 a year. Outstanding, right? So I tell him, do me a favor, go enjoy the presentation, come up to me afterward, let me know if I answer your question. So for the people that are paying attention, pop quiz. If my friend P90, who is Google smart, elects to take early retirement benefits before his full retirement age, and he's subjected to the earnings test, and if he accidentally makes $75,000 to $125,000 year one, if Social Security is going to withhold $5,000 for every $10,000 above the threshold of $18,960, is my friend P90 in jeopardy of having no money in his Social Security check?
Absolutely, he is. He's likely to zero out his Social Security.
Now, you think the son of a gun would have come up and thanked me for my wisdom and genius afterward, right? He actually didn't. But I do know he had a conversation with the financial professional who was hosting the event. And what they did was they determined that they were going to look into see what the other opportunities were. But if you think this through, if my friend P90 on a reduced basis could have collected $25,000 a year, and you times that by 62, 63, 64 into 65, you know, he was on the verge of almost making upwards of $100,000 mistake.
Yes.
You know, now listen, this earnings test, there's more to it. Okay. We don't have to go through all the nitty gritty details, but there's one thing I want your listeners to understand, and that's this. If one elects to take early retirement benefits and there's a little bit of Social Security gets withheld, but it still helps you achieve your life goals, consider doing it. But make sure you base your decision on information and data. And the reason why I say that is when one turns their full retirement age, if any money had been withheld, Social Security gives it back to them. Okay. But it's not like they win the lottery and they get it in a big lump sum check. But if only a little bit is going to be withheld and the income is going to help someone achieve their retirement or their life goals, well, then when they hit their full retirement age, any withholding starts to come back, but it's extrapolated out over a longer period of time. But at least not everything is lost. And then the last thing is, if anyone really loves what they do for work and they're planning on working past 66, 67 years old, once one hits their full retirement age, there's no earnings test. So there's no withholdings.
Okay, awesome. And it's often talked about that when you wait and don't take Social Security at 62, that the amount of money that you would get the following year, the benefit increases by about 8%. Is that good information?
Could you repeat the question the way you said it?
So if I don't take it at 62 and I take it at 63, I'll get 8% more at 63 than 62.
Okay, that's
And
perfect.
then again, they would go up by another 8% if I wait for 64 instead of 63. And a lot of people use that as a guidepost to help them decide, because waiting is attractive because you get more money. But my thinking on this, and I'd like your opinion on it, is if you live to actuarial age, call it 86 years old, whether you take money earlier and get smaller amounts at 62 through 86, let's say, or you wait until 67 and get more and get the payments for less time taking you through 86, you basically end up with the same amount of money in total. Isn't that right?
Yeah, you're talking about what would be the break-even analysis. But before I address that question, let me back up real quick on something.
Yeah.
The rule of thumb for a lot of people is the 8% delayed income credit, which is the amount that one Social Security check would increase if they delay from their full retirement age up to age 70.
Okay.
When one is considering taking between ages 62 up to their full retirement age, and we're assuming that one happens to be born before 1960, it's not exactly an 8% increase each and every year.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure that so at age 62, one might be able to take 75% in our example. If they wait till 63, they could get 80% of their entitlement. So it goes up by 5%.
All right. So it's not 8% along the way. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the second thing is what you're talking about would be the break-even analysis, and it's the most important analysis that one would want to go through. And that what that says is, if I'm ever thinking of taking my income now versus delaying, if I delay, how long do I have to live, and how many of those higher paychecks do I have to collect in order to at least break even on the volume I didn't collect up front? Is that fair enough to say? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the rule of thumb is about 12 to 13 years. So we always tell people in jest, hey, if you can let me know when you're planning on passing away, we could let you know when you should take your Social Security income.
Yeah, it would be a much easier decision if we could get that data point.
But given we don't know that, it's about a 13-year break even. And given the life expectancy of around, you call it around age 86, yeah, it is almost a little bit. You can make a very good case to say that it's 6.5.
Yes, and it's such an individualized situation. I know what my bias is and what my default is, but there's really lots to consider. And if I'm consulting with 10 clients on the subject, we might end up with 10 different solutions that are optimal for the client and fit into the client's planning and helps them get to their goals and objectives.
Yeah.
But, let's just talk about some of them. As an example, if you are in poor health, that is a hint that taking Social Security earlier might make more sense because your mortality may be less than others, and nobody knows what's promised to them in terms of the number of days, but that's an important thing, as opposed to in the other end of the spectrum, somebody that says, my grandmother lived to 108, my grandfather lived to 99, and I have lots of longevity in my family. You might want to factor that into things a little bit.
Yeah, no, and that's why when the Nationwide Retirement Institute brings something to the table, like the education and insights on Social Security, what we're doing is we're looking at Social Security in a vacuum, right? Because we don't know anyone in the public, we don't know their personal circumstances. And that's where you, as a financial professional, you take the information, and then what you have to do is you have to compare it to one's financial situation, to their health situation, to the longevity in their family. And then you can take the information that we give you in a vacuum and make it applicable to each and every client in a way that is meaningful for them.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. Another example is there's this concept, and I know you're familiar with it, Steve, is OPM, other people's money. And so if somebody has a nice little nest egg, or a nice nest egg, maybe it's not so little, part of the conversation is going to be, would you rather use your money and wait to tap into the Social Security, which is sort of your money, but you don't really control it because You kind of just have to do what the program says you do. It's not something that has a lot of flexibility or anything. Or do you want to do OPM, other people's money, take the Social Security first so that you leave your nest egg maybe untouched or not have to generate as much income because it's supplemented for Social Security? You know, that's a key consideration. Lots of people would forego the increase in future Social Security benefits because they would rather keep their nest egg intact, either for them to use and or perhaps increase the legacy of money that they leave to their heirs if there's money left over at the end of their lives. So that's another personal discussion point.
And that speaks to the point that I was just bringing up, that we can talk about a lot of this material in a vacuum and to try to help the greatest percentage of people that will hear us present. But that's where a financial professional that's doing best interest financial planning is worth their weight in gold, for exactly that reason, because not everyone necessarily wants the highest legacy, even though that might sound counterintuitive. Not everyone wants the same things. And that's where you're worth your weight in gold and taking the material and saying, what's in my client's best interest? And, you know, if you ever look at any distribution company, when they put together thought leadership on Social Security, the thought leadership naturally sounds like we're trying to get people to delay their Social Security income. Okay. But like you said, once you pull it out of the vacuum and then you put it into someone's circumstance, well, now that's where you really get to geek out, kind of like the way we talked about on the tax efficient retirement income podcast we did.
Yes, I think actually the mainstream press and the default that waiting for Social Security is better is, I'm contrarian on that. And I would push back upon that being the default. I don't think it's an appropriate default decision because there's too many other factors. And I think a lot of the media will do a disservice by pointing out if you wait, you get more, but they're looking at that in a vacuum, not counting in mortality, not counting in the importance of a legacy, not talking about the flexibility of turning on and off income. There's a lot that's missed in that default advice that's out there. And it's one of those things that candidly kind of, can I say pisses me off? I guess I can. It's my show, right, Steve?
Go for it.
Yeah. So this is great. Now we've mostly spoken up to this point about the basics of when you get to that 62 to 70 timeframe, deciding on when you want to begin Social Security. But where I think some of the more significant complexity, because that's kind of complex enough what we just talked about. That's not fair. It's not really complex. It's just a lot of moving parts, a lot of considerations. None of it's rocket science. But I think there's an additional level of complexity when you get into some of the other things. And I'd like you to touch on those at least briefly. Things like spousal benefits, survivor benefits, divorced benefits. Because if I'm speaking to counseling somebody on their retirement planning and income planning in retirement, and they were divorced, especially if they were divorced a while ago, it becomes a little trickier. So can you talk about some of these individualized benefits, maybe starting with divorce?
Yeah, we'll start with divorce. And what's really neat is back in 2016, all right, slightly dated study, Boston College came out with a study that suggests there's over $10 billion a year left on the table by people incorrectly filing Social Security with marriage-related benefits. Okay, so since that's a 2016, give me a 40% margin of error.
Sure.
Can we agree 6 billion is a boatload of mistake?
I think that's very kind. I bet you it's way more than that. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's the perfect parlay into understanding where some of these people have made mistakes. So starting with divorced spouses. If you've had someone that has been married for 10 years or longer and they got a divorce, okay? Now here's the cool part. If they're currently unmarried and both ex-spouses are over the age of 62 and you've been divorced for 2 years, the ex-spouse doesn't have to open their file. Your clients or your listeners are going to be entitled to a benefit off their ex-spouse's file if it's in their best interest, and they don't have to talk to their ex-spouse. They don't have to engage with them at all. All they have to do is take their marriage certificate and their divorce decree, make it available to Social Security, and Social Security will open up everything that one needs. Now, that's assuming that you've been divorced for over 2 years. So what can one collect? A divorced spouse can collect up to 50% of their ex-spouse's entitlement at their ex-spouse's full retirement age. So if you had a married couple, right?
Yeah.
Married for 10 years, got a divorce, 3-4 years go by. Okay. And one of your listeners fits this profile. Well, what they can do is if they wait till their full retirement age, they can tell Social Security, I would like to possibly take what would be a divorce benefit, and they can collect up to 50%. So in this example, let's say that the ex-spouse could have collected $2,000 at their full retirement age.
Yep.
And your listener waits till their full retirement age. That means they can collect a full $1,000. But keep in mind, if they ever elect to take early retirement benefits before their full retirement age, they never get that full percentage.
Right. And that's that complexity because, you know, you got to be married 10 years and there's the 2 years and the rules are different if you've gotten remarried. So this is that real individualized planning that we're emphasizing here in this discussion. You know, show me 10 different divorced people, and just because of that, there might be 10 different versions of choices available depending on the rules. And that's even before you get to what their income is, when they're going to retire. You know, it's just, that's how you get to, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of choices. Survivor benefits is another one. So when you have someone pass away, there's a range of choices for the survivor. I think this is for both the surviving spouse, but I think there's a benefit for minor children available too. Is that right?
That is right. So when you had 2 married spouses and one happened to have passed away, as long as they had been married for at least 9 months, you have to jump over that 9-month hurdle. Okay. There are going to be survivor benefits that open up to the survivor, right? The widow or the widower. And what's interesting is you'll notice is that the filing rules and options are distinctly different than the divorce benefits. For instance, now you only had to be married for 9 months, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Benefits can also be taken 2 years prior to the retirement benefits. So you can take benefits as early as age 60.
Yeah. It's just a lot of nuance.
A lot of nuance, but let's confuse the topic a little bit to have a little bit of fun here. What kind of benefits can one pull, right? Benefits that can filter down to the survivor are whatever the deceased entitlement was at their full retirement age. So if you have a listener and they had a spouse pass away before they were eligible for Social Security, you know what? As long as they had a 10-year working history paying into the trust, that survivor will probably have a survivor benefit coming to them. And a lot of people are not aware of that because they think that the person that died before they were collecting their Social Security means there may not be a benefit, and that's not true. In addition to that, remember those 8% delayed income credits we talked about if one delays from their full retirement age to age 70?
Yeah.
They filter down in a pseudo death benefit from an income perspective. So if one happens to have delayed past their full retirement age and they collect those 8% delayed income credits, well, then the survivor can actually have an even higher paycheck, which now really starts to make the conversation of analysis very interesting. What's more important to your client, Mr. Professional? Is it that maybe they have a higher legacy or a higher nest egg to pass on to their heirs? Or were they the primary breadwinner and the person with the higher financial IQ? And would they rather potentially have the highest possible check coming in for the survivor when you're no longer here to take care of the finances for them?
Yeah. No, that's a great example.
Right? So there are all sorts of, now one last thing, which is really cool about survivor benefits is this gets really confusing. Sorry, folks.
You know, you're really geeking out. Like you're so pumped up about this. And listeners are probably like, oh my God.
Slow them down.
Yeah, there's so much little nuance, minutia. It's like a trivia contest. But go on, you're on a roll.
Okay, I'll tell you what, since I'm on a roll, and I think this is one of the most important things with survivor benefits, if you qualify for your own retirement file, At any point in time after age 60, you could always tell Social Security to restrict any benefits being paid to you off of your file, allowing you to pull your survivor benefit. And it allows your benefit to grow by the higher and higher percentages up to age 70.
While you're collecting the survivor benefit.
While you're collecting the survivor benefit. So
That's a neat trick.
There's an analysis that we always like financial professionals to be aware of, that if you have a survivor situation, consider the restricted application for survivor benefits and see if later on you can get your client even more income.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And the other one, and we'll just touch on briefly, is their spousal benefits. So if you're, I think, well, why don't you explain what are spousal benefits?
Spousal benefits, as long as you have a married couple over 12 months, they've been married for over 12 months, as long as both are age 62 and older, and one of the spouses is collecting their Social Security income, the counter spouse can collect up to 50% of the claiming spouse's file.
Or their own file, whichever is more advantageous.
They will get whichever is the highest of the two for the vast majority of your listeners.
Okay, there's some exceptions to that. But as you could see, listeners, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of, none of it, as I said before, is rocket science, but there's just a lot to this. And it's an important decision because it's irrevocable. Once you select your Social Security benefit and you turn it on, there is no going back. It is irrevocable. And that's makes it an important decision because it's not changeable. So keep that in mind. Let's just, in the time we have left as we wrap up, Steve, let's go back to the beginning. I know I'm doing it at the end, but why was Social Security created in the first place? What is the goal of Social Security? It's morphed over the years, like originally when it was first implemented during the Depression, I think it was, right? It was in 1931 it was started, something like that, 34?
1935.
Okay. You didn't have survivor benefits. There was not divorce benefits. These are things that evolved over the years. But what was it created to do in the first place? And is that mission still intact today?
Is that mission still intact today is the perfect way to phrase it. And the answer is yes. And here's why. Social Security, when it was created, was never intended to equal 100% of one's retirement income. It was supposed to be a little bit of a safety net to help get our nation's elderly through any tough periods that we might have had. So if we rewind to the Social Security Act of 1935, what was the economic conditions of our country in 1935?
In the midst of the Great Depression.
Pulling out of the Great Depression, 25% unemployment, right? 25% of our nation's elderly were literally homeless without a roof over their head, waiting in bread lines without food in their belly. And if they didn't have enough money to pay for their shelter or their food, you think they could afford to go to the doctor for the simplest of ailments? So it was kind of a dark period in our nation's history where our nation's elderly didn't have any safety net to help cover what we call guaranteed essential expenses, right? And what I mean by that is, you know, if you're taking a look at keeping a roof over your head, having food, or maintaining your health, aren't they kind of important?
Absolutely.
And aren't they important until the day you're no longer with us?
Yes.
That's a guaranteed essential expense. So what our country decided to do was pretty radical for the time period, but they decided through tax mandate, they figured if they could tax every business that hasn't gone out of business in the Great Depression yet, and if they could tax every employee that was lucky enough to still have a job, they might be able to create a little bit of a safety net. So when we fast forward and hit that tech bubble burst in the early 2000s, or that subprime collateralized event, whatever that thing was, right? Or the great pandemic of 2020, our nation's elderly would just have a little bit of income that's guaranteed by backed by the federal government of the United States.
Right.
It would just help them get through those tough times, but it was never meant to be 100% of one's income, just enough to get people through the toughest of times. And then hopefully through people's own elbow grease and working with financial professionals and preparing for the future, that they would be able to have income on top of that to live their golden years.
Understood. And so is that still intact today, you think?
Every generation since its inception thought that Social Security was not going to be there for them. And so far, so good. So no matter what anyone happens to say, the Social Security Administration has done an excellent job. And this has been a program that has served millions upon millions of Americans. And for the foreseeable future, that is absolutely the case.
No, and we could finish on this. A lot of people, and actually, Steve, I was with a mutual friend. I won't say his name because he's a big fan of the show, so he listens, so I won't embarrass him by using his name. Talked about how Social Security will be insolvent in a short period of time. But nationwide, you, me, I think we're in agreement that we believe there's a high likelihood that Social Security will remain solvent, will exist, will pay its promised benefits. There will be changes and adaptations, but I have a high level of confidence it will be there. Is that a fair position to end on?
Every several years, Social Security is very transparent and comes out with a report. And since we've seen the disability trust and the retirement trust molded together, they have said that if there are no legislative changes between now and 2033, well, then potentially the Social Security trust may not have any funds in the trust, which would really boil it down to a debits and credits game.
Right.
However, that means we have between now and then where there are many levers, to use your term, that could be pulled, and any one of those levers could cure the solvency of Social Security overnight. So with that said, I tend to be optimistic that Social Security will be there for me. I can't predict the future, but I do think that we have a very resilient country. We have a very resilient system. And I know that entitlements are not only important to the population, but to the people they vote for. And I don't think anyone's going to vote themselves out of office by letting Social Security get challenged. One man's opinion.
That's a good place to end it. Steve, thank you for joining me. I want to thank you personally, as well as Nationwide and the Retirement Institute. Really appreciate it. Listeners, check out my website, elliottwealth.com. If you're not a client and you're interested in learning more about how we help our clients win with money, make smart financial decisions, you could sign up for a complimentary consultation. I'll be back with you on the next episode of the Simply Financial podcast very soon. As always, thanks for listening.
The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of SagePoint Financial Incorporated and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. No strategy can assure a profit nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Please note, the information being provided is strictly as a courtesy. When you link to any of the websites provided here, you are leaving this website. We make no representation as to the completeness or accuracy of the information provided at these websites, nor is the company liable for any direct or indirect technical or system issues or any consequences arising out of your access to your use of third-party technologies, websites, information, and programs made available through this website. When you access one of these websites, you are leaving our website and assume total responsibility and risk for your use of the websites you are linking to. Securities and advisory services are offered through SagePoint Financial Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC. Insurance services offered through Elliott Wealth Management, LLC, not affiliated with SagePoint Financial.